We went to Penwortham, did me and Jeannie Mackintosh, in the Scarlet P. That's my nickname for Jeannie Mackintosh's rusty old jalopy, because it's red and the number plate ends with a P, as indeed do most old bangers. Penwortham's just south of the River Ribble. It was recorded in the Domesday Book as Penverdent. It means the hamlet on the green hill. Not something you'd automatically associate with Preston, I must admit. But it does have an historic hill. Castle Hill it's called. It's a motte bailey, or rather it was back in Norman times, built by Bill the Bastards, aka William the Conqueror's mate, Roger de Poitou, to guard the ancient ford across the Ribble, from what history doesn't record. Before that, according to some, it was a Roman fortlet, and even further back in time, a prehistoric encampment. Others disagree. We're not going to get involved in the argument ourselves. In history circles, taking sides on such matters could result in some serious punch-ups. According to the now extremely late Reverend William Thornber, Lancashire's most infamous pugilistic and generally intoxicated vicar, a tale most stoutly persisted, claimed that from the vicinity of Castle Hill or the Priory there existed a subterranean passage which communicated with the hospital on the opposite bank of the Ribble. It seems unlikely. There might have been a sewer or something. Whatever the case, the castle itself fell into ruin in the 13th century and was presumably well buggered by the time that St Mary's, in whose churchyard it now stands, was built a century later. The oldest part of St Mary's is the chancel, which we had to film from the outside because nobody would let us in, dating from the 14th century, although the West Tower isn't far behind at the 15th century. Or ahead, depending on which chronological direction you're facing. The font's fairly ancient too. We couldn't get inside to film that either. And there was only one photograph of it on Google, so you'll just have to bear with us on this. It's inscribed with the words TR 1667, believed to have been donated by Thomas Robinson, not the idiotic racist right-winger, vicar at St Mary's from 1653 to 1654. The font itself is thought to be much older than the inscription, however. Believed by some, again no arguments please, to have once been a plague stone, where money was washed in vinegar. Outside in the churchyard there are a couple of interesting bits and pieces, other than the motte bailey of course. One's a gravestone dated 1662, and another's another gravestone dated 1686. Both the Grade 2 listed. Presumably related, if only by name, just down Church Avenue stands, or rather sinks, or possibly even sank, the medieval St Mary's Well, looked after by the Benedictine monks from the nearby Priory from 1075 to 1535. Back in those times it was visited by Catholic pilgrims, attracted by its alleged healing properties. It was paved over in the middle of the 19th century because too many pilgrims were using the stone trough to take a bath in, which is perhaps as well, otherwise some idiot had probably poisoned themselves trying to drink it. The well is now marked by the pedestal of a cross and is haunted, once again allegedly, by Roman soldiers. Don't ask, we just don't know, or care, come to that matter. There's another ancient cross base, the cross itself having been restored to commemorate the Great War in 1919, further down the road and round the corner. Quite a long way further down the road if we're being honest, but who's counting? It's called Howick's Cross for what it's worth. Let's stick with St Mary's Church, however, for a legend concerning fairies. Apparently, one midnight long ago, two men were walking home from the pub, or more probably staggering, past the church when they heard the bells toll out, ringing, as was the fashion for funerals in those days, the exact number of years that the younger man had lived for. Further down the road they encountered a fairy funeral. Hiding in the hedge from fear, they watched as the procession passed, noticing, as you would, that in the coffin the face on the tiny corpse resembled that of the younger man. who was, by now, probably wetting himself. Needless to say that about a month later he fell off a haystack and landed on his pitchfork. These old legends seldom end well, or very inventively come to that. The little folk, wearing red caps and climbing trees, are still to be seen to this day in Penwortham woods. If anybody wants to check them out, what they're up to is anybody's guess. Another historic landmark in Penwortham is Old Penwortham Bridge. We think it's this one. The lowest bridge across the Ribble, apparently, although, to be fair, one of them had to be. Old Penwortham Bridge was built from yellow and red sandstone circa 1760, and that's about all we've got to say about it really. Then there's the old water tower on the junction of Cop Lane and Liverpool Road. This was built by Lawrence Rawstorn in 1890, so it's not exactly ancient. However, Rawstorn clearly wasn't the visionary that he thought he was, as the water tower was rendered obsolete when the water mains were laid just 5 years later, in 1895. Let's have a ghost story, this time with some actual footage as opposed to the usual cheap and nasty green screen effects that Lancashire Footnotes likes to stick over the top of some dodgy filming. Unless the owners of Lollipop Sweet Shop watch this and tell us that we can't use it. We hope they don't. Amy and Lauren Ella Wilson, the owners of the aforementioned Lollipop Sweet Shop, noticed this white orb floating about on their CCTV footage. Just days before, Amy's sister Megan experienced her own close encounter when, as she was cashing up, her bag fell off the counter. Alright, the bag falling over probably wasn't the scariest footage ever, but the white orb meandering around looks a damn sight more convincing than anything Yvette Fielding ever managed to capture. Did I mention the Priory? I probably did in passing. Not the clinic for celebrity druggies. Penwortham Priory, which was a Benedictine building full of ex-Benedict and what have you. Following the dissolution, it was bought for £3,088, sounds like a bargain to me, and turned into a country house for the Fleetwood family. I said the Fleetwood family, not a Fleetwood family. In 1912, the lodge was taken down and rebuilt in Moor Lane, Hutton. The manor house was eventually demolished after the Second World War and replaced by a housing estate, and that, as they say, was that. Much like this episode. We're finished now. Subscribe if you're that way inclined, consult your GP if you've actually enjoyed the last few minutes, and we'll do our best to meet up with you again in the next exciting episode as soon as my hip's mended.